I thought to talk about schemas, drawing from the 18 schemas of schema therapy. And I'll just say that identifying your schemas, even like taking a schema inventory, can be a really good way to kind of organize and work through your insecure attachment. Okay, so the first schema that we'll cover is abandonment and instability. So this is this kind of like excessive fear of abandonment and kind of also sense of instability. This is a core feature of anxious preoccupied attachment. Now we'll talk about the mistrust and abuse schema. This is in a sense, the effects of having been abused, having experienced even deception around danger, protection, and so forth. And people with anxious preoccupied attachment and versus people with dismissing avoidant attachment really manifest this schema very differently. People with the mistrust and abuse schema that have preoccupied attachment tend to be preoccupied with mistrust and abuse. They will see kind of potentials for, in a sense, betrayal, deception, abuse, and so forth. They will see that more than it actually is in reality. And again, this is the effects of unprocessed, unresolved memories of abuse, trauma, mistrust, deception. Now, on the other hand, people with dismissing attachment are, in a sense, like overly naive about the possibility of abuse, of deception. And so, in a sense, they have like a kind of naive trust. And I think this is actually kind of interesting. People with dismissing attachment dismiss their own negative emotions. And it is our negative emotions that is what contributes to our ability to identify who is and who is not trustworthy. And so this internal process has been shut down for people with dismissing attachment. Emotional deprivation is the next schema. So in here, I'll just read out the definition on the schema therapy website. So the expectation that one's desire for a normal degree of emotional support will not be adequately met by others. And this manifests as deprivation of nurturance, deprivation of empathy, deprivation of protection. And so I think this is emotional deprivation is common to both insecure attachment styles. And I think it's kind of more deeply ingrained in people with dismissing avoidant attachment. The next schema is defectiveness and shame. So this is a sense that, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. And this is more strongly a marker of dismissing avoidant attachment, although people with preoccupied attachment definitely have this schema as well. And I like to think about this schema as kind of internalized rejection. And it kind of goes with some sort of belief around like, oh, I deserved the rejection. And this is the way I'm explaining it more of a way that someone with dismissing avoidant attachment would interact with this schema. And I'll add that people with this missing attachment kind of exonerate or exculpate the other, and then they blame themselves. So that, we'll call it structure, is very consistent with defectiveness and shame. So a bit of a caricature of someone with dismissing attachment. They'd be like, oh yeah, like, oh, my parents, they were neglectful, but I was really, really difficult. I was like way too emotional. So it's understandable that they were rejecting with me. Really, the problem is with me. The next schema is social isolation and alienation. So this is feeling that like you really don't fit in the world. There's really not a place with you. You don't have a group or community. This is also experienced by both types of insecure attachment, but I think it's more salient in people with dismissing avoidant attachment. Right, dependence and incompetence. This is this belief that, oh, like you can't handle everyday responsibilities and so forth. And this is more salient in people with anxious preoccupied attachment. There and there's also a way in which dependence and competence fits into anxious preoccupied attachment in a strategic way. People that developed anxious preoccupied attachment often found that by overly presenting helplessness, that the quality and amount of care increased. So there can be an unconscious process of over presenting incompetence and dependence. Also, people with anxious preoccupied attachment struggle really coming to semantic conclusions. And what that means is like they struggle to really have like a sufficiently concretized view of self in world in order to take that next step, because we need to have, even if it's momentary, a model of self in world, and then around that we behave, like based on that construct we behave or take action. And so because people with anxious preoccupied attachment struggle to concretize a view of self in world, this can lead to this dependence and incompetence schema. The next schema is vulnerability to harm or illness, and this is also more exaggerate or more of a marker of people with anxious preoccupied attachment. Enmeshment and underdeveloped self. So I would say this is more a feature of anxious preoccupied attachment, although we can see it in a different way in people with dismissing avoidant attachment. The next schema is failure to achieve. I think this is seen more in people with anxious preoccupied attachment. Right. The next schema is entitlement and grandiosity. So this schema can be seen in both types of insecure attachment, but I think it's more salient in people with anxious preoccupied attachment. People with anxious preoccupied attachment tend to focus on self and dismiss the perspectives of others, and that's a setup where a kind of sense of entitlement fits in naturally. However, there's also a type of certainly grandiosity in people with dismissing attachment, but this is, I kind of call this like a negative grandiosity, where they they dismiss themselves in a way that is actually grandiose. They like think that they can kind of almost be above tending to their own needs, and then they will take excessive responsibility for others in a way that is, again, grandiose. Insufficient self-control and self-discipline. So this schema, I think, can be seen in both types of insecure attachment, but I would really actually back up and think about this schema as largely based in emotional dysregulation. Like if you are emotionally dysregulated, how are you going to discipline yourself? How are you going to really even just go after what you want in life? And emotional dysregulation is the core feature to all insecure attachment. The next schema is self-subjugation. So this is kind of deferring to others, kind of giving them power over you. And I would generally think about this more in dismissing avoidant terms. So there's this kind of dismissal of your own, like the validity of your own view of self, other, and world, a dismissing of your own emotions, especially negative emotions, and also anger. So that's more of a dismissing avoidant presentation of self-subjugation. However, people with anxious preoccupied attachment also have the self-subjugation schema, but this relates more to getting others to take care of them, and so like not doing for themselves what they could do, and then unconsciously hoping that the other will then care for them. All right, the next schema is self-sacrifice. This schema I would see overwhelmingly as more of a feature of dismissing avoidant attachment. Approval seeking, recognition seeking. So I think this schema is also seen in both insecure attachment styles. People with dismissing avoidant attachment tend to have this outside in view of themselves. They kind of see themselves through the eyes of others. However, people with anxious preoccupied attachment also have this schema, but I think it feels a little bit different for them. Here, they're often looking for reassurance and almost like looking to be paid more attention to, because there's this like fear of abandonment. There's this sense that like, oh, if I don't get someone to tend to me, care for me, etc., I'm lost, I won't be well. And so negativity and pessimism. So this presents more so in people with anxious preoccupied attachment. However, one way in which negativity and pessimism is stronger in people with this missing attachment is in terms of looking towards the future. Often people with dismissing avoidant attachment will be really pessimistic about the future. There's this kind of sense that they're just totally locked into the way that things are, and there's this inability to imagine that they can overcome their earlier conditioning. Whereas people with anxious preoccupied attachment actually tend to be exceedingly hopeful about the future, but yet lack a plan as to how to get to this positive future. And this last piece I'm drawing from the work on Patricia Trittman. All right, the next schema is emotional inhibition. And this is where we kind of shut down our own negative emotions, and this is very core to dismissing avoidant attachment. The next schema is unrelenting standards, hypercriticalness towards self. So the way I said it there, this is more so what we would see in dismissing avoidant attachment, but on following the thread of criticalness, a criticalness towards others would be seen more in people with anxious preoccupied attachment. And now to the schema of punitiveness. So people with anxious preoccupied attachment, and this is a more extreme version of it, are more likely to be punitive towards others. Whereas in more extreme cases of dismissing avoidant attachment, that punitiveness is directed towards self.